Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a walk through the front lines on today, the 24th of November, 2022. Sorry about the slight echo. I've had to change room today for reasons outside of my control. Let's get on with it. So what has happened? It's been a very busy day yesterday. So before I get onto the cruise missile attacks, let's have a look at the figures from Ukraine provided in terms of the Russian losses. So 310 troops, that's down from yesterday and the day before. 7 APCs, 4 vehicles and fuel tanks, 1 tank, 2 artillery pieces, and 10 UAVs, 51 cruise missiles. That's a massive uptick. I don't know that all of those UAVs, all those drones were during the cruise missile attacks. Certainly 5 of them were. The rest might have been on the front line. Let's have a look at that. So what happened yesterday? There were 51 out of 70 cruise missiles shot down. So that's 70 cruise missiles attacking Ukraine. And I keep talking about there being potentially a lack of cruise missiles, lack of stock for these missiles from Russia. These, I think, were mainly KH-555s, another KH, and I think some calibers as well, but I might need to look into that. So they are using up these stocks. Do they not have enough, or do they have enough? The interesting number is 70 for me. So when you've had saturation attacks previously, we've had 90, 100 sort of big waves, and this is a big wave, don't get me wrong, but it's slightly less than it has been. And why is that? So if 19 of the 70 got through, imagine how many would have got through if there were 100. So why didn't they send 100? Is it because they are running shorter? Is it because they can't manufacture enough? They are manufacturing some, apparently. What are the numbers? This 51 out of 70 is also an important stat because that is a lower percentage of cruise missiles shot down. So how come it's not at the sort of 80 to 85% or 90 to 95%, depending on what the context is that we have seen previously? And I'll explain why that is in a second. I think Russia have been quite clever here, considering they are firing fewer missiles. But let me just, this sort of comment is common from pro-Russian accounts. Clive Engel here says massive. This is on my YouTube video thread from yesterday. Massive cruise missile attack on tonight on Kyiv. The Englanders, as always, are wrong. Russia's manufacturing 120 cruise missiles a month. That's nice. I mean, nice to have evidence of that, but fair enough. So the British MOD are always wrong because they don't have the spooks inside Russia and are not being able to penetrate the GRU or FSB. So your analysis is wrong. Okay, fair enough. But still, as I've mentioned, the cruise missile wave wasn't as widespread as I thought it could be. Why is that? Are Russia just being nice or less horrible? Russia has run out of missiles every day, and today, says Nikos G. So these pro-Russian sources are trying to have a go at me for being wrong, and I don't think I am wrong. So I think the fact that there were only 70, it does tell you something. But Russia have been quite clever here. So whereas you'd have 100 in previous attacks, there might be 100 cruise missiles attacking the whole of Ukraine. They're using fewer missiles, but they still need saturation, and they still evidently got saturation because only 31 only 51 out of the 70 were shot down. And this is because they sent 31 of them to Kyiv. So the saturation isn't nationwide, but they saturated one focus spot. And that has allowed them to overcome and saturate the air defense systems around that area. So it's not like they're overcoming all of Ukraine's air defense systems. But in this case, they have sent fewer missiles, but a high proportion of them have been sent at one spot at Kyiv. And that has saturated the Kyiv airspace and overcome the Kyiv air defense systems. So that is a bit of a problem. What's interesting is 5 drones out of 5 were shot down. I don't know where they were, but that is certainly encouraging for Ukraine. But this is a real problem. Ukraine their energy system is on its last legs, and this makes you sort of start to question, well, what's the point of fighting all the way over here and on these lines and all these people dying if the rest of the country is unable to function as a civil society, and then as Russians might have to evacuate There's talk from the mayor yesterday about Kyiv evacuating. If they have to evacuate, you'll have a refugee crisis. This is exactly what Russia wants, and they will suddenly have at least a very large PR win and possibly a strategic win for them. Um, so there's loads of tension. This is why you're going to start seeing, and we are seeing already, lots of assistance to Ukraine from international allies in terms of electricity generators, help for rebuilding substations, money directly for, just money for the energy infrastructure and humanitarian aid in that context. So there might be a shift from military weapons to other sorts of assistance. There has been, you'll see an uptick in that. Um, but it's definitely a challenge. 70% of Kyiv is still without electricity, and there are plenty of threads I could show you that talk about how difficult life is without electricity and water in what is now freezing temperatures. So there's water only on the left bank. Today, more consumers will be reconnected to the power grid. Poltava, optimistic about getting up and running today, but still electricity out for critical infrastructure and for consumers. Water in some areas. Surgeons at the Kyiv Heart Institute, this is so aiming at the critical energy infrastructure is like successful in terms of what Russia are trying to do, but they appear to be trying to do war crimes. So they're successfully doing those, and they're making a good job of making life hell for the civilians in Ukraine. It's just that's not under the conventions of war. That is breaking the laws of war. So surgeons at Kyiv Heart Institute used flashlights to continue operation with no power after Russian missile strikes. So staff spent the night in the clinic, continue emergency operations, and have no water. Quote, so far we are coping on our own, but every hour is getting harder, says the director. It's a massive shame. And the Russians are gloating on social media. They're showing images like this, such as Ukraine in the darkness and the rest of Europe having sort of electricity and light. And so the map of Ukraine in the dark is spreading on Russian Telegram. Okay, what other news can I say? Well, according to Defmon here, 60 BMP-1, so these are infantry fighting vehicles, very old type, and 92 T-72 tanks, 37 Euro trucks have been transported from Belarus to Ukraine in October. Now, that is a bit of a worry for the Ukrainians. That will help out the Russians on the frontline war. Okay, let's go to our front line. Let's go to the northeast, which is the Kupiansk to Svatove-Kreminna axis here. And on our war mapper map, that is up in the northeast here. So that is where we're going to be looking at to begin with, but really not a lot to say about that. No map changes. Battles continue south of Kreminna. Russian brought reinforcements and additional building materials to Svatove axis to strengthen its defensive line. That would be things like Dragon's Teeth, but other things as well. Fighting in Kuzumivka was reported. Kuzumivka is this key town to the northwest of Svatove. So Svatove's here, Kuzumivka is there. That's where there's been intense fighting for days. Other than that, it's just repelled attacks from both sides. Positional fighting down near Ploschanka and Chervonopivka. Doesn't seem to be much movement there. Things are wet and muddy around this area, so it is difficult to move. But south of Kreminna here, there's been a lot more activity over the last week, and things seem to be happening there, although no changes on the map that I know of. As Defmon says, so the Ukrainians repulsed attacks in the area of Bilorivka, Spyronia, and Berestova. These are the same areas that have been attacked for months now, but it remains mostly stationary. So there you go. And then we move down to Bakhmut. Bakhmut, there is some movement just south of Bakhmut, obviously Berestova and all these areas still, no change doesn't mean things aren't happening. There's still war going on there. Solidar Bakhmutsk are particularly affected at the moment. I showed you a video of that yesterday. Please check out yesterday's update if you want to see that. Bakhmut, no news out of sort of central Bakhmut, but I think there's things still going on around there, and Opitny as well. But we have seen a move from the Russians in the area south of Bakhmut, Klishchivka, a move towards these lakes that are there, across from this road, and then down to Kurdyumivka. The deep state map shows this as a movement, so 21st to the 22nd. You can see that movement down south of Bakhmut. So nothing anywhere else along the line, but down south. definitely movement for the Russians there. What does Defmon have to say about that? Russians keep walking into line of fire, but they have reported partial success around those two places. Otherwise, Ukrainians repulse. So I've changed that on my map. Sorry. There we go. And then we moved further down south to Avdivka and Donetsk, just to let you know that Noel reports as well, saying no map changes. Heavier shelling and fighting occurs in the usual places: Bakhmut, Klishchivka. And then we moved it on down to Avdivka and Vodyany. North of Bakhmut, evacuations took place. I don't know what that means. I don't know anything about this. So Bakhmutska and Soledar, which are pretty much destroyed, you can imagine people might be hanging on in the very outskirts of those places, but maybe it's towns further west of there. I'll need to look into that. As he says, Russia is stuck and stalled. The battlefield is littered with corpses. It is. I've seen evidence of this. I have seen evidence that it's really difficult for Ukraine as well. So this is a nutritional meat grinder for both sides. I did see an interesting video, which I won't show you because it's not quite appropriate, but there was a foxhole with about 8 Russian soldiers in, all sort of still but alive. Like then they're not dead, they're moving slightly, but generally just all huddled, fetal position, lying down, whatever. And a drone is over them and drops an IED down broadly onto one of the people there, and they hardly move. One of them sort of moves slightly further away and tries to get underneath someone else, almost as they're all sort of huddling. But it's really bizarre. Like if a drone dropped an IED on me or near me, and I was huddled with a bunch of other humans, I would be like, right, I'm out of here, just climbing out of that hole and running. But no, they hardly move. And there was talk, I think it was Defmons just saying, what is going on here? Like, why is there no movement? Are they just really, really cold? Are they malnourished? Are these the mobilized troops? They don't seem to have much equipment with them, other than the clothes they're wearing. It's just interesting. And what does it tell me? Really bizarre. There you go. Anyway, as we come further down south, we are coming towards Pavlivka and then Donetsk. Donetsk is a city right on the front line, has been since 2014, and last night was particularly heavily shelled. Also, an electricity substation hit in Yazynivka, and you wonder if that was purposely hit. In the same way that Ukraine, is this revenge? Why would Ukraine want to hit the energy infrastructure of occupied Ukraine that they want to liberate? I don't know how wise that is, unless it's a mistake or what. I'm not sure, but that seems a bizarre choice to me in terms of a target. So here it is: an electrical substation occupied Yazynivka is on fire now. Last night, the Ukrainians heavily bombarded occupied Donetsk and surroundings, which might have caused the fire. It's located adjacent to Donetsk and Makivka. That's another Makivka, not the one in the Svatove axis. So Ukraine shelled Donetsk city heavily this evening. That's last night. We have no more info than the footage there. It's just footage of nighttime explosions. Tomorrow, probably Mr. Grumpy will show up inspecting the damage. This is a reference to a guy that goes around, he calls him Mr. Grumpy, goes around to loads of the HIMARS sites where HIMARS have blown up targets and holds up. He's all sort of dressed. He's a member of the armed forces. Has a clipboard with the date on and holds it up next to the HIMARS attack. This is the day after, once it's been cleared up and whatnot. And it looks really grumpy. And you kind of don't really know what the point of him is, why he's doing that. But that's what he does. So he's called Mr. Grumpy, at least by Noel here. So then we move down south. It's just repelled attacks all around here. Very heavy fighting. Vodyany, Oputny, Pervomaysky, same. Novelsky here, that little village out in this flat open countryside here, is also the scene of a lot of activity. But no changes. We come down to Marinka. So Marinka has seen an awful lot of activity. Gets a lot of aerial bombardments and attacks, shelling. And the Russians have advanced pretty much a kilometer there over the last few days. There is heavy fighting in the central area. I updated my maps to reflect this, but this is what's Rybar is showing about this. And this is, one of these typically quite heavily produced Rybar videos with their sort of music they have on and whatnot. Actually, this has some. This has some commentary, which I'll read to you for those who are listening. So this is showing Marinka and the completely destroyed buildings, very similar to Bakhmut yesterday and Soledar that I showed you. Just like, again, the destruction of war. Why would you want to come and liberate somewhere by destroying it? But anyway, Russian motorized riflemen continue to liberate the town of Marinka near Donetsk. And by liberate, they mean sort of broadly blow it up. And this is the center of Marinka. Soldiers stormed an Ukrainian stronghold at school number 2 and evacuated civilians hiding in the basements to the rear. Ukrainian formations held their defenses in a 4-story building on Okta-Bayera Street. I missed that. Russian artillery strikes forced the enemy to retreat from its positions. Russian armed forces units were able to advance right up to the district government and community center buildings in this very center of Marinka. And I think this sort of tree area and that building there, I'm not 100% sure. It could well be these sort of buildings in the center with these trees here. So that could be what we're talking about. I might be wrong. It could be any of these buildings really, but there is heavy fighting going on in the center, or at least heavy shelling, and probably very heavy street fighting too. And that is one of these meat grinder areas, but one where Russia are making some advances. And is one to look for. Okay, as we come further south, we come to Pavlivka, and we wonder exactly what the Russians are doing there. Just to let you know, so this is what Defmon said about Marinka that I just talked about. Over the last few months, Russian have advanced about 1,000 meters in Marinka, so a kilometer over the last month. I said a few days, actually, it's the last month or two. I've adjusted the front line accordingly. But otherwise, the Ukrainians have repulsed attacks. And then we get down to Pavlivka. So he says Russians keep accumulating troops in the Volnovakha area. I believe their goal is to encircle the important Ukrainian stronghold of Vuhledar. And this is certainly what seems to be happening. As Noel report says, Russia stopped their offensive operations in Pavlivka and Novomykhailivka at the moment due to heavy losses. Russian forces are reportedly accumulating around Volnovakha, likely to do an offensive flanking operation via Novomykhailivka. Okay, let's just talk through that. So here we have Pavlivka, Vuhledar north of it, and Volnovakha here. So what they're saying is that Russians are accumulating forces around here, but they're no longer doing this because of the terrain, the elevation that Vuhledar has over Pavlivka, which means that this becomes sort of killing fields between the two towns or two villages. And what amazes me is that it's taken Russia this long to realize that it's probably not a good idea to keep banging their head against this brick wall, to keep sending their forces in, scandal after scandal. And massacre after massacre, they've said, oh, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe instead we should flank Vuhledar. I mean, goodness me, look at a map. Look at your topographical maps before you do an attack. Work out what's the sensible thing to do. Draw up a plan and then execute that plan. Don't just have, let's just do a frontal assault on Vuhledar. And if that doesn't work, do it like another 20 times. And if they don't work, then maybe another 5 times. Gee whiz. So, you've got, this is on a terrain parity coming down here. So it's level pretty much with Vuhledar. You want to be coming down there to attack Vuhledar, which means it's probably better to attack here and then down. And that will give you a much better chance of taking Vuhledar. So it's really, this is the key, Novomykhailivka rather than Pavlivka, because you don't have the same kind of disparity of terrain here. At least I might need to check my topographical maps again, but this should be an easier way into Vuhledar. Or you could just, leave Vuhledar and encircle it. maybe come up from the west as well. Um, all these options, but instead we've seen over a month of Pavlivka seeing death after death after death. Just I don't know. The Russians sometimes just amaze me in what they do and what they don't do. Okay, let's move on to the final place here. So, not much news from Zaporizhia as far as the Kherson area. A hangar was hit in this Kherson region with heavy equipment. So that's evidence that the Ukrainians are still hitting strategically important or tactically important places on the south or left bank of the River Dnipro, but the Russians are heavily shelling the north or right bank of the Dnipro River. And in fact, they're shelling Kherson. It's this weird scenario where they're like, let's liberate Kherson. Yay, we're here. We've come to save you from these Nazis. Yeah, we're liberating you. Okay, we're withdrawing. And then we're going to bomb you. We're just going to shell you. We're going to shell this city. And you're like, hang on, you were just like supposedly liberating it before. Anyway, as Noel report says, no confirmed map changes. The Kinburn split area is unclear. We withhold from statements regarding this area until further notice. So the things will be happening there, but it's under OPSEC, operational security. So not a lot coming out of information coming out there. Russian troops shelled Kherson in 4 days from November the 20th to 23rd. Shells of the Russian army hit 45 places. 7 people have died. Just, a quite hardcore barrage. On the night of November the 22nd to 3rd, Russian occupying forces shelled a hospital in Bereslav. All the windows were broken in the medical facility. There were no casualties or injuries, luckily. But, what are you doing hitting Bereslav? It's just bizarre. Anyway, the Bereslav is there, just north of Novokakhovka, the other side of the dam there. So that is something else that's happening there. So here is a hangar being hit, targeted and destroyed with everything inside, apparently full of heavy equipment. Quite a big hit. Whether that is artillery or HIMARS or any other kind of rocket launch system, I don't know. Full of heavy equipment in Slavne. And here we have evidence this has happened today. So I've had one report it's a rocket, another report it's artillery. Don't know whether it's which one it is, but this is a children's playground. This is a residential area of Kherson. What are you doing? Either you're one, really inaccurate and bad at firing artillery or rockets, or two, you're just complete bastards, or three, both. Yeah. So just again, this kind of shelling seems to be happening so much. The flip side, of course, in my attempt to be at least somewhat balanced here, is Ukraine are really heavily hitting Donetsk, and I wonder how accurate they are in doing so. Now, what I hope is that Ukraine are using things like Excalibur and HIMARS. So when they're doing that, they're using guided munition. That means that they are not causing collateral damage to the civilian infrastructure and to civilians directly. This is in their best interest. This would be a big PR loss if Russia are putting out loads of videos of residential areas getting destroyed by Ukraine. So you would imagine that they are using appropriate munitions to do those kind of jobs where the Russians aren't, because they lack these kind of accurate munitions. Okay, the other thing that's been happening in Kherson an awful lot over the last week has been collaborators being rounded up. So as I count collaborators as Russians, I include them in the losses section. Here you see a group of collaborators that are caught by the SBU in the Kherson region. They will face trial for collaborating with the enemy and high treason. More and more collaborators are being caught by the SBU. They are being rounded up. And you've got to remember that there will be people in Kherson who are supportive of the Russians and their regime and sympathetic to their intentions. More so in Luhansk and Donetsk. I do wonder about what happens with the liberation of those areas, because the people who are pro-Ukraine will have already left. So what you're going to be left with in Donetsk and Luhansk are broadly pro-Russian civilians in the main, who have been fed a diet of misinformation and disinformation and been brainwashed with the kind of media that they are watching and listening to. And so therefore trying to liberate those areas and I say that with scare quotes because that is going to be an interesting idea. Like these people won't necessarily feel like they're being liberated by the Ukrainians, and they might have far greater pro-Russian tendencies. Places like Kherson, you will have some, but it will be different to Donetsk and Luhansk. Okay, the Russians to continue on this. Sorry, the Ukrainian special forces or uh, the intelligence services of Ukraine have detained a Russian accomplice in Kherson who helped them escape on boats to the left bank of the Dnipro. They exposed him during stabilization measures in Kherson. He turned out to be the owner of a local pleasure boat station and helped Russians escape via his property. So people have been wondering how the Russians managed to be so successful in their operational withdrawal. One of the most successful things they've done in the whole war, which is retreat from somewhere, but they did it really well. And there are theories that they did a deal with Ukraine. There are other theories that they just did it really well, and that they've been getting their people out over a longer period than was initially thought, possibly disguised in the civilians, the 70,000 civilians that were evacuated. Russians aren't too keen on doing things for the purposes of the well-being of civilians, right? You look at Mariupol, you look at these other places, and yet they very publicly said, right, we want to get 70,000 civilians out of Kherson. They did that, and suddenly there were no troops left in Kherson, really, apart from a bunch of mobilized troops who were brought in to kind of shore up the lines. But the better troops, the VDV and the airborne troops, had naval infantry brigades had left. Well, it turns out that we think that they've dressed up in civilian clothes or just mingled amongst the civilians who were evacuated, and they got out most of their mechanized equipment as well. So it really was very successful, but there were people who helped them, and these collaborators are now being sort of held to account. Okay, that's that. Thank you so much for watching. The main thing was the missile strikes, obviously, on Ukraine as a whole, but particularly Kyiv. Um, Not a lot of change on the front lines, but I'll keep you up to date. Please check out my extra video, which will be going on my main channel today. But alternate days, I do put them on my ATP Geopolitics channel, my new channel that I've started, where eventually all of this material will be housed. Please go and subscribe to ATP Geopolitics, which is youtube.com/at ATP Geo. It's now coming up on the searches in YouTube, so that's good. There's a few videos there. You can watch these. These are all extras, so they shouldn't be too out of date. That you can still watch them and get stuff out of them if you haven't already seen them. Please subscribe, please like, share, and hit the bell and all those things. And there are all the ways you can support the channel. It's really helpful, very useful. And I would appreciate that greatly. Anyway, till the pips, and I'll catch you for the extra video later.